Good morning. Have you had a glass of warm water yet? It's a small thing, but it makes a big difference. Now, let me ask you this. Would you do if your mother-in-law broke into your home and your child said they never wanted to see her again? This isn't just another toxic mother-in-law story. It's family betrayal, true revenge, and a twist that even the husband didn't expect. So here's what happened. The technates of At Free 2009, this woman, we'll call her Mia, had been dealing with her mother-in-law for years. Not just the usual passive-aggressive comments or unsolicited advice about raising kids. No, this was next level. We're talking full-on narcissistic mother-in-law behavior, invading boundaries, manipulating conversations, and playing the victim when held accountable. But it reached a boiling point the day her toxic mother-in-law crossed a line that should never be crossed. She broke into Mia's home. And I don't mean accidentally walked in or used the spare key to drop something off. I mean she literally broke in, uninvited, unannounced, and completely unapologetic. Now let's pause here. Can you imagine how you'd feel if someone, especially a family member, trespassed into your safe space? Would you ever feel secure again in your own home? That's not just disrespect, that's a deep betrayal. And for Mia, it was the final straw in a long list of crazy mile stories she could have written a book about. But that wasn't even the worst part. Her mother-in-law didn't just stop at breaking in. She yelled at Mia's middle school-aged child, screamed actually, and not out of love or concern, but out of pure rage. That's where this story crosses from bad family drama into emotional abuse. It's one thing to argue with your daughter-in-law. It's a whole other thing to traumatize a child just to prove a point. And here's what makes this a classic justnomil podcast story. After everything, Mia's husband still wasn't sure if cutting ties was the right move. He questioned whether his wife was being too emotional, or maybe even biased. He suggested that they were only hearing one side of the story. Sound familiar? This is something that happens far too often in relationship drama podcast cases, when one partner downplays serious harm because it's just mum. But Mia? She wasn't playing games anymore. She made it clear, I'm going no contact, and I don't want our child around her either. Now that's a bold move, but it's also a protective one. When a parent says, I don't feel safe with this person near our child, that's not a suggestion, that's a boundary. And boundaries, especially with toxic family, aren't optional. They're necessary. But it leads to a hard question. Where do you draw the line between protecting your child and respecting your spouse's family ties? When does loyalty to your partner mean standing up to their parents? And when does it become control? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever had to draw a line in the sand like this? Drop your story in the comments or message me privately. This is a space where we don't judge, we just try to understand. Let's be honest. Drawing boundaries is one thing. Getting your partner to respect and enforce those boundaries, that's a whole different game. After Mia told her husband she was going no contact with his mom and didn't want their child exposed to her anymore, you'd think that would be the end of it. You'd think that once a parent saw their child feeling scared and uncomfortable, they'd say, okay, let's protect our kid. But no. Instead, her husband said something that many of you may have heard in your own lives. I want to hear how our child feels directly, not filtered through you. Now, let's pause. At first glance, that might sound reasonable, right? It sounds like he wants clarity, wants to be fair, maybe even avoid taking sides. But when you take a closer look, it's actually part of a much bigger issue that shows up in so many wife versus mother-in-law stories. A partner who refuses to trust what they're being told, even when the signs are clear as day. Let's remember something. Mia's child isn't a toddler. They're in middle school. Old enough to express themselves clearly. Old enough to say how they feel without any scripting. And most importantly, old enough to know when someone makes them feel unsafe. So, the husband goes to the child, probably expecting some hesitation, some confusion, maybe even a soft, I still want to see grandma sometimes. Instead, the child gives a one-word answer. Good. That's it. One word that held more weight than 1,000 family therapy sessions. That's not filtered. That's not coached. That's truth, straight from a kid who's had enough. This is where so many crazy mill stories turn into true revenge stories, not because someone plotted revenge, but because the truth finally hits. The emotional impact of a child rejecting a grandparent isn't something any parent wants to witness. But when it happens, you have to ask why. What led a child to that point? And for those of you out there who've had to go low or no contact with a narcissistic mother-in-law, you probably already know. Kids can feel the tension in a room. They sense control. They notice when someone makes their mom cry behind closed doors, or when visits leave everyone drained instead of uplifted. So here's the hard question. Is it really bias when a parent is advocating for their child's well-being? Or is it experience speaking louder than denial? Sometimes, the people who accuse you of bias are the ones too scared to face the truth. And in this case, that one-word answer from the child said everything that needed to be said. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever had to convince your partner that a family member was doing more harm than good? How did you get them? Let's talk in the comments. This isn't just another family betrayal podcast story. It's a wake-up call for anyone stuck between loyalty and love. Now here's the twist that hits hardest for so many of you listening. What happens when your partner finally sees the truth, but still doesn't want to act on it? After that moment when the child said, "Good," with zero hesitation, you'd expect that things would finally shift, that the husband would say, "Okay, I hear you. I hear our kid. It's time to move forward without her." But instead, he froze. Not out of confusion, not out of love for his child, but out of guilt, fear, and something many of us know too well: emotional conditioning by a toxic mother-in-law. You see, when someone grows up with a manipulative, narcissistic parent, especially a mother who plays the victim, guilts her children, and flips every story into her favor, it creates a lifelong emotional tug-of-war. Even when reality stares them in the face, they're still thinking, "But it's my mom." Let me ask you this. How many of you have stayed quiet in the past because calling out someone's mother felt like crossing a sacred line? That's what makes husband-mom drama so complicated. It's not just about disagreement, it's about deep emotional loyalty, even to someone who's causing harm. And in story time, with twist moments like this, what makes the story so gripping is that there's no clean solution. No simple, she's right, he's wrong. Because here's the thing, Mia wasn't asking for her husband to hate his mother. She wasn't demanding revenge. She was just asking him to protect their home, protect their child, and protect her peace. But he was torn between being a husband and being a son, between doing what was right and what would avoid the next big family explosion. And that's the real tragedy in so many toxic family Reddit-style stories. The good people in the middle who let guilt overpower action. The saddest part? Mia saw it in his face, that hesitation, that internal battle, and she realized, he might never fully choose me. That realization, it broke something inside her. Not because she needed validation, but because she was fighting this war alone. And no one should have to stand alone when trying to protect their child from someone who's already caused so much damage. So let me ask you, when is staying silent more dangerous than speaking up? Is keeping the peace in a toxic dynamic actually worth the price you pay at home? So many of you have written in, shared your own narcissistic mother-in-law experiences, and how long it took your partner to finally understand. But for Mia, this was the moment she knew. If her husband wouldn't choose safety and sanity for their family, she'd have to do it without him. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever reached that point in your own relationship where protecting your This isn't just a family betrayal podcast story. It's about strength, boundaries, and the cost of peace. Have you ever looked at someone you love and realized they might never protect you the way you hoped? That's the moment Mia found herself in. After years of biting her tongue, letting things slide, and trying to keep the family harmonious, she finally hit her wall. Her toxic mother-in-law had screamed at her child, broken into her home, lied about her in therapy sessions meant for healing. And her husband, he was still thinking it over. That kind of relationship drama isn't just about mother-in-law problems. It's about being left unguarded by the one person who promised to stand by you. Mia wasn't just frustrated, she was heartbroken. So she did what many women in these toxic family situations finally do. She quietly shut the door. Mother, not just emotionally, but physically. She told her husband she was going no contact, not only for her own well-being, but for their child's. And let me tell you, that decision didn't come with applause. It came with tension, guilt-tripping, blame. Because in crazy MIL stories, it's not the abuser who gets called dramatic, it's the one who dares to set a boundary. And let's be real for a moment. Tech. Going no contact isn't easy. It's isolating. It's filled with second-guessing, family whispers, and emotional fallout, but it's also powerful. Mia's child started sleeping better, smiling more, feeling safe. There was less anxiety at home, less walking on eggshells, and perhaps most importantly, there was a new sense of peace in their space. Her husband, still torn, still distant, but Mia wasn't waiting anymore. She had stepped fully into protector mode, and that, my friends, is what makes this one of those true revenge stories we often hear but rarely talk about. Tech. The revenge of silence, the revenge of choosing peace, the revenge of living well without chaos. And it's not petty, it's not cruel, it's survival. So many women in our Just Normal podcast community have written in about this very moment, the shift from tolerating to deciding, from enduring to reclaiming. And the aftermath? It's not always pretty, but it's honest, it's grounded, and it's necessary. Let me ask you, have you ever been called too extreme just for choosing to protect your peace? Where's the line between forgiveness and foolishness when it comes to toxic in-laws? This isn't just another episode in a narcissistic mother-in-law drama. It's a turning point in a woman's story, one where she chooses herself, her child, and the future over the illusion of family. And I think there's something incredibly brave about that. Stick around, because in the next part, we'll talk about the ripple effects, tech. How family members reacted, tech. What Mia did next, tech. And why her child, yes, that middle schooler, ended up being the... That's the moment Mia clung to as she navigated the fallout. Because once she went no contact with her toxic mother-in-law, the next wave wasn't silence, it was backlash. The husband's family labeled her dramatic. Some friends said she was making it worse. And worst of all, her husband still seemed unsure. But here's the twist. The one voice that mattered most, her child. When asked directly, this middle schooler didn't hesitate. Good. That was their honest answer when asked how they'd feel if they never saw grandma again. And that one-word answer changed everything. This wasn't just a wife versus mother-in-law story. This was about a mother finally being seen, not just by the man who promised to stand beside her, but by the child who depended on her most. That's what separates this story from your everyday relationship drama podcast content. It's real, it's layered, and it's a reminder. When you create boundaries, you give your children the power to breathe. So what happened next? Mia stopped apologizing for protecting her peace. She started therapy, not with her mother-in-law, but for herself. She set up firm rules with her husband. If he wanted to maintain contact with his mother, that was his choice, but their child was off limits. And slowly, painfully, things began to shift. Her home became calmer, her child opened up more, laughed more. Even her husband, who had been in denial for so long, started to see the cracks in the image he held of his mother. This is the quiet power of true revenge stories. It's not about yelling louder, it's about walking away from the noise. So, If you're listening today, maybe you've been in a similar position. Maybe your toxic family dynamics aren't with a mother-in-law. Maybe it's a sister, a father, or even a friend. But the question always remains, when is it okay to choose peace over tradition? Here's what I want to ask you, and you don't have to overthink it. Drop her in the comments if you believe kids deserve to feel safe, no matter what. That's it. Just a heart. No long story, no details. Just a sign that you stand for peace over pressure, truth over toxic ties. Because this channel isn't just about crazy mill stories. It's about reclaiming space in our lives. From narcissistic mother-in-law drama to family betrayal podcast moments that hit a little too close to home. So hit that follow button if you want more stories that feel real, raw, and maybe just a little bit healing. And as always, take care of yourself. And when you need to, take your peace back.